Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in Metaphysics by Borden Parker Bowne, published in 1882. We're going to take a look at pages 242 to 273 and take a look at the nature of motion, and to round out the cosmology section in this manuscript on metaphysics. Beginning with block 1, motion as a coefficient of space and time. Bowne tells us motion is due to the interaction of things. Motion is the manifestation of a thing's metaphysical state. Internal state is the ground of motion. It provides the potentiality of motion. And motion is always a measure of velocity. It's always a space passed over a unit of time. So under note 2, the coefficient, the inner state of a thing, impels it to change its position, and velocity is a coefficient of space and time, space passed over a period of time. One thing cannot transfer its own motion to another, instead it produces motion in another. So a key point for Bowne is that the beginning and the cessation of motion involves the creation of the new. It creates the new state. Motion brings about new state. That new state of the infinite, imprinting finitude. So motion is always a spatial expression of an internal state of things. It's always this expression of internal state. So under note 3, the direction of motion, or the telos, is due to the interaction of things. Things may possess an actual inner tendency toward a new state. Remember, we look for those markers, those nodal points of entry in experience, those tendencies toward kingdom. So things may possess an inner tendency toward new state. Direction is always necessary to motion. In other words, for Bowne, motion is always teleology. It's always teleology. So let's take a look at note 4 and look at the summary of block 1. We begin with internal state. A thing's internal state is its ground of motion, or its potentiality. 2, we look at the coefficient. The space passed over in a unit of time equals the coefficient of the law of motion. And then 3, inertia to produce effect. Motion is manifested as a spatial expression which creates an interaction due to the tendency toward the new. It is an actualization of these tendencies toward the new. Therefore, causal unit. Our sign model as causal unit possesses an internal potentiality to create motion as a teleology. That's how it applies to that phenomenology that we already have discussed in a past lesson at the beginning of the book. We got his phenomenology up front, so we know that our sign model becomes a causal unit, and it has an internal potentiality to create motion as teleology, with direction and purpose, So now we want to take a look at that concrete teleology in block 2. What does that concrete teleology look like? So under block 2, motion as concrete telos direction. Telos and subjective internal condition is first. Direction is given from within, not from without. Direction is from the internal state of things. A thing is driven from within toward a certain point of the new. Motion and direction are the outcome of this internal state. So Bowne says we must posit the notion of internal condition that is the foundation of motion and direction. Now there's the note 2, the objective metaphysical state. Internal state always varies with objective direction. And direction is represented by the metaphysical state of matter. There is that objective metaphysical state of matter. The law of inertia affects change in the metaphysical state of matter. So this law of motion is always subject to the demands of the overall system. So Bowne tells us that the character of system takes on a very significant role because it is going to determine the emergence of the new metaphysical state of reality. So the character of system is extremely significant. Character of system will inform motion, and character of system will inform direction. So we got to keep that in mind. And that leaves us note 3, block 2, note 3. Subjective internal condition and objective character of system equal a cosmology as system. The action of a thing is determined by the interaction of the whole system. Cosmological activity also maintains the inner life condition, the inner mindset, the mindset. Movement is always based on the state that the system demands. The law of inertia is a system necessity. This inertia of movement toward kingdom, toward the future of kingdom, toward the new state of kingdom that the system is demanding. So there is a given teleology within system. A teleology that we learn and work through and internalize as we also mature in our mindset or internal mindset. So we have that conclusion in block 1 that our sign model as a causal unit possesses an internal potentiality to create motion as a teleology. And then we have the conclusion of block 2 that movement is always based on the state that the system demands, that teleology of a state, of new state, of concretion. And the law of inertia serves that teleology. That brings us to block 3 and the base law of motion. The law of inertia is joined by 2 other laws of motion. Interaction always results in reaction. There's always a reaction to the interaction of system. Now, Bowne tells us that motion has a threefold composition. Number 1, that internal mindset has to be considered. The character of mindset determines the emerging new thought and that emerging sign model that we will posit. First principles, the law of inertia, the law of the equality of action and reaction, and the law of parallel force make up the 3 laws of motion. And then teleology. First principles are coupled with the aim of nature as a teleology. There's always this backdrop of kingdom, which is a teleology. It's always a Pauline teleology. That's what it is. It's always kingdom, imprinting finitude with its teleology toward the fulfillment in Christ, toward fulfillment of kingdom. So the plan of system is the ground of the laws of motion. And then note 3, the action of the laws of motion seek to imprint matter. Matter is a force and a cause of its own. Speculative reason does grasp this counter force of matter, of finitude. Being passes from one manifestation to another. Of this imprinting of the teleology of motion, imprinting the counterforce of finitude and matter. So we get great cosmological teaching here from Bowne on the nature of motion as a teleology. It is motion as a teleology. Motion must have direction. Remember, he says direction is a necessary component of the law of motion. Direction is a necessary component. It's a eschatological, spiritual necessity. It imprints finitude. It is the imprinting of finitude by the inertia of kingdom, by the inertia of the movement of spirit. Remember, spirit moves from dunamis to energia. That movement of spirit from dunamis to energia is a movement under the law of motion according to Bowne and under the direction of teleology, under the three laws of motion and under the aim of nature, which is a teleology. So all of the movement of spirit from dunamis to energia must be within this realm of the laws of motion, which are three for Bowne, and they are laws that are abbreviated under the aim of nature, which is the direction of teleology, the spiritual teleology that is imprinting finitude and invites our participation in those tendencies toward motion. It invites our participation in those tendencies toward motion that are on the verge of actualizing and ask for our participation in mission. We perceive those tendencies spiritually, and through spiritual perception, we then take up the praxis of actualizing those tendencies by positing our sign model, which becomes a force of its own because it's a causal unit, and it's creating the motion of teleology as causal unit. Then we're moving toward that new state that the system demands. So we get excellent additional teaching in this section of the book on cosmology. It is a little bit different approach because these pages you'll see are teaching through negation. Bowne goes through a great deal of negation, explaining what he does not accept concerning the nature of motion, or what he does not accept as the nature of space and time and motion, before he will eventually get to his positive inferences and deductions after working through page after page of negation. So it's tedious reading. It is a task to work through this section of the book because it's teaching through negation, what he does not accept on the nature of space and time and motion. But we've taken the time to filter out his positive statements in these past three lessons, the past two in this current lesson on space and time and motion, to grasp a significant spiritual understanding of kingdom and the movement of spirit from dunamis to energia, which reflects space and time within being, and being as a movement toward a new state of being, which unfolds the kingdom of Jesus Christ. So it becomes powerful teaching. It takes us from 242 to 273. There's one more section left on cosmology that we'll take a look at next time. And after that, we move into psychology. So we're going to be leaving cosmology and moving into psychology. We've got one more major lesson that we'll take a look at that will wrap up cosmology. That's going to begin with page 274. So that wraps up this lesson on the nature of motion in Bowne Parker Bowne's Metaphysics, published in 1882.